Well, let's go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining me today for telling your story with data and for sticking around to the last breakout of our week of PD meeting. So as we get going, of course, we're going to start with your favorite, the disclaimer. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right, now that you've made it through the disclaimer, I'm looking down through our participants today. I think I know most everybody, but I am Sarah Brightwell. I lead the OIE Technical Assistance team and will be taking you on this data storytelling journey. Just to give you a little background about myself. So I was a teacher. I taught junior high English and a little bit of math, and then went into administration, running out of school time and community programs for everything from little bitty early childhood learners up through all different levels of adult learners. And did that for a number of years, both in an urban setting in the Dallas area, and then in a very rural setting in a small community in Texas that covered about 650 square miles of not a whole lot of town, but a whole lot of country. And then entered into this world of working in education consulting and working with the Department of Education, being able to provide technical assistance to grantees like yourself. So with that, let's talk more about what we're going to do today in this session. We're going to define data storytelling, really make sure that we're kind of all on the same page about what that even is. Talk about the key elements of data storytelling, and then transform your messages into impactful data stories that resonate with your audiences, and even explore a few tools for data visualization. Now, you'll notice that most of the sessions you probably attended over the last few days were more the webinar style, where you were on the platform and you viewed the presentation, and you maybe had some polls or you had some chat, but you were kind of over on the platform. You'll notice today you're here in the room with me. That is intentional because this session is designed to be interactive. So if you're feeling brave, you are welcome to join me on camera. I see Georgia has done so. Thank you. Hello. But I also understand that we are all in different time zones and doing different things. You may be working from home in your jams. You may be working in a big room where there's just too much going on. So if you would like to stay off camera, I completely understand. It is fine either way. What I do ask that you humor me and do, though, is talk to me. So we're going to be doing lots of activities and discussions. And so unmute, chat with me. If for some reason you can't, go ahead and pop those comments and questions and thoughts into the chat box. But I would appreciate as many of you as possible interacting and actually chatting away as we go throughout. So as we get started, like I said, if you have questions as we're going, let me know. We want to answer those questions right as they're popping up for you. So don't feel afraid to ask anything that pops in your head. Let's start out with, I want to know, what types of data do you collect? Whether willingly or unwillingly, what types of data do you typically collect in a year? Like I say, you can unmute.
GPA.
What was that? GPAs?
GPAs, grades, and I do an SEL survey.
Nice.
ACT scores.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've got
persistence, retention, early alerts, praxis scores, portfolio and program learning outcome ratings.
Nice. Thank you.
Also do data on our Native students that attend after-school tutoring, their GPA on that, and how well it's working for the students, if it's working.
Yeah.
Graduation data, yeah. How many students are taking native language classes?
Hmm.
That's, I mean, although it's not part of our grant, but I mean, those are some of the data that we take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Any other types of data that you're collecting that maybe no one's mentioned yet?
Conrad mentioned in the chat, grad rate and enrollment.
Perfect. Thank you, Conrad.
We collect a lot of IAPs, student support plans.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So now, as you're thinking about those types of data that you're collecting every year, now I want to know why. Why do you collect that data?
See if our programs are working, see if our students are being successful in the programs that we are offering.
Okay, so is what you're offering working? Any other
It's
reasons? Oh, yeah.
It's working if we have, or if I have staff to uphold the program. And it won't work if that's not the case. And if I don't have students, you know, it goes both
Yeah.
ways.
Absolutely. Any other reasons you collect that data?
Couple from the chat. Nicole said to make informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Sage mentioned to create services and to meet needs of the students / families.
Yes, you know what you should offer. Great. Any other reasons you collect that specific data?
Probably been said, but it's, are we being effective? Are we reaching our objectives? And then we have to, because that's how we said we would put in our reports.
Yeah. No, and that's a very honest answer. Sometimes there's data that we're collecting because we have to, because we're expected to report on it to somebody.
It's also used to report to our constituents.
Yeah, so you have different stakeholders that you're reporting your data to as well. Yeah.
In many of the letters of support that we got, the request was for us to share the data with them because so often we go out and we find folks to support our grant efforts, but we are not very good. At least we haven't, as an organization, been really good at relaying what those findings were. And so we're being much more intentional this year with, some of our tribal entities in our district. We have 10 that we work with, relaying back to them in their letter of supports what we're actually doing and the movement we're making. So
Yeah, so it's really, to be a good partner there. I think that's a great kind of lesson you've learned over time. Well, this is a little fact that I found in research that I thought was pretty interesting, that less than 0.5% of all the data ever collected is ever going to get analyzed and used. And there was even a report in, I think, 2017 that there had been more data collected in the last 2 years than in all of time before that. So we're living in a time of so much data. And you're welcome to share or raise hands, but how many of you know there's some data you collect that you don't really use? I'm honest enough to say that, yeah, when I was back in the school district and doing lots of data collection, there was honestly some data I collected that it just got collected to be collected. I never actually did anything with it.
I'm pretty sure I have data that is collected and reported on, that who it gets reported to doesn't utilize the information.
Yeah, so you're just a checkbox for them too. Yeah, I understand that feeling as well. Yeah, so as we think about this, and some of you kind of started sharing in this, who are you sharing your data results with? Where does it live outside of your knowledge?
So with the programs that I work with, so the like Navajo Nation is one of the grants we're under. The state public education department, well, OAE also, but I mean, like Shannon said, it's given to them, and it's on my part, presenting all the data, sharing all that information. Yes, I'm doing my part, and at the time being stressful about it too, of
Mhm.
how to present this data, and is it being really looked at? I mean, for me, it's good knowledge because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this program is working, our students are learning, that do partake in the program. But, the idea is always for all of our students, all of our Native students to be a part of it. And some of them just don't want to, or just, I don't know, various reasons, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all strive for great participation, but we're never going to get 100%. So don't beat yourself up there. But yeah, always striving for more.
We data is reported for our accrediting bodies annually to our board of trustees. We try to select key pieces of it that go to our students. And, one of the things that kind of became very obvious to me this year is we are scoring portfolios, culminating from a candidate's career or their educational path, that they get their scores back, but they don't necessarily see as a whole what that means for program learning outcomes. So
Yeah.
there's a piece of data that hasn't been shared with our candidates. If they knew that information up front, there are some things that they would do a little bit differently. So I know that's a piece we need to add when we do our professional portfolio workshops. Sharing with them the data from previous
Yeah.
groups.
Yeah, because I think there's definitely knowledge or power in that knowledge. Well, and y'all are starting to kind of go into my next question. So we can kind of address it together. But as you think about those groups that you're sharing with, and I see Fawn also sharing, she shares with tribes such as tribal consultations, school boards, PACs. So why? Yeah. When you think about those different stakeholders that you're sharing that data with, why do you share it with them? And I think we've talked about, for some of them, it's because you have to. They're a funder. You're required to do it, or, they license your program because they're the state or they're the accreditation agency. So you're required to do that. But what other purposes are there for sharing this data with these groups? Why do you share it with the students? What do you hope to get out of sharing it with, say, your tribal council? What are those purposes?
Cultural relevancy for our teachers, if since some of the things that I do is student surveys, so trying to share that out from a student's perspective, what they're thinking of attending our school, they're feeling supported, or if the teacher is being understanding from a different viewpoint for our Native students.
Well, and I'll push one step further. So if you're sharing with them that data of them feeling included and connected and engaged, why do you want the teachers to know that?
To possibly have them be open to the idea of possibly, if they're not being culturally responsive, then maybe they can change their way of teaching for our students to be more included in their classroom. How can they bring in different subjects in order to share out for our students to be engaged in
Yeah.
different subjects that are brought to them.
Yeah, so you're hoping to kind of push for some change there.
Yes.
Great. Any other reasons you share this data? Beyond pure requirement?
I mean, sometimes it helps, whether it's a board of trustees or a granting agency or an accrediting body, sometimes it helps them to understand our challenges.
Mhm.
And sometimes in the process of analyzing the data, we actually are able to find some things that maybe tell a little bit different story than what our perception or impression is. So certainly it helps us to make some better decisions.
Yeah, so it can even almost unintentional benefit cause you to re-examine and maybe make some changes as well. Great.
Yeah, and typically, I mean, I'll tell folks, usually I don't expect to find surprises in the data because we know how things have transpired. But sometimes there are things that are hidden that when we move the rocks and look under them,
Yeah,
sometimes we find some things there.
absolutely. Well, I think it's great that you're open to that. Sometimes it can be difficult to see those things when we think, man, I really thought this was working really well, but maybe not quite as well as I thought. So I invite you, particularly as we kind of go further along, to really be thinking about, why you share data with your various groups, entities, stakeholders.
I'm just going to add that for our students is, hoping that they grasp whatever the program that we're presenting to them. We had a Native senior reception and we brought in a previous graduate from our school, and he's going to be, his aim is to be a music teacher. And he shared his his music performance, and some of our students that were juniors in high schools, they were really like in awe, bringing that back and finding that connection of, with the possibilities of what they could attain. That's one of the whys too.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and it's almost twofold because you're hoping that they're going to understand the value of what you're offering and the opportunities, but also to encourage that participation. Let's move to our next think about. Now, as you're thinking, we've talked about what you're collecting, who you're sharing it with, and some whys. How do you share the data with them? How is that distributed? What does it look like? Is it
It probably tends to look fairly technical, either in some type of a report. Even if it's in a presentation, it tends to be a little more technical. If you're, like if we're sharing with the board of trustees, we're able to share the information and then give an oral description of it. But for somebody to read it on their own, is probably more difficult.
Yeah. So more of a technical kind of research heavy report.
I think depending on the audience as well, who you're presenting to, as far as if you're reporting to OIE or if you're, with a council meeting trying to get across some information or some data. But, something that we're going to be doing for our data collection extension final report is an infographic, which I think is, it's very succinct. It gets the information out, it's eye-catching, and it's a good way to kind of get the really important information across. Because when you go to a school board meeting and you just get the, 20 or like 100 pages worth of data, and it's presented to you at the school board meeting, and to look over the safety plan or whatever it might be, that's a little bit too technical to get across what needs to get, what needs to be consumed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all been presented with those big reports before that as you're reading, you're like, uh-huh, okay. And you kind of get that report glaze.
It's like them sharing the, what is it, the NAEP data too. It's like huge
Mhm.
flip and want to take the time to look through it, but just, I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't even looked at it other than what was shared, attending some session or something. But
Yeah, it can be overwhelming.
yeah. So, and then I also share with our state Indian Ed department, tribal consultation. So through our Navajo Nation, share that data with them, parents. That's
Well, and how
yeah,
do you share it out? It's like a kind of a report.
right. The state does a
Mhm.
report, tribal consultation. We meet either in person, so through PowerPoint or yeah. And then with my Indian education parents, we'll meet in a meeting and just try to go through the data of, this is bar graphs, make it more understanding for them to what we're trying to assess or the
Yeah,
feedback.
thank you. All right, and then my last question for now, kind of a big question. So is that working for you? As you think about the data you're collecting, who you're sharing it with and how, and you think about why you're sharing it with them, is that working? Are you getting the intended results out of that? So for some of you, you were sharing, you want the kids to be understanding the benefits and opportunities of your program and to participate. Is that working? Or you want a funder to understand where their money is going and to continue funding you? Are they getting it? Are your parents understanding what's happening in your program? So in all of these different ways that you're sharing this, do you feel like it's really working effectively for you? And I'll say, so for instance, I ran, like I shared before, these community programs, and I would go before the school board and present on all the different things that I thought were the amazing programs we were doing and our participation and how many people, said that they were satisfied with what we were offering or liked the different activities. But I often felt pretty confident that no one on the school board was actually reading my full, beautiful report, or for the most part, absorbing my amazing PowerPoint.
I think for me, is it working for me or for us? It just depends. Like with my parents, I could say if they're really involved into changing the outcome of our students, yes. But if we have consistently turnovers, then no. And then some parents are just there just
Yeah.
to be there. So it really depends on who our stakeholders are and who are really there invested into the programs that we're wanting to bring to our schools or programs. Yeah, it just depends.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. That, yeah, it may be working better in some arenas than others. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Sarah,
Yeah.
I'll share a story in the sense that might not have worked for me personally, the organization I worked. I was asked to present my program, and I centered on 3 main aspects. And of the 3 was the SEL, the Project Venture Experiential Learning that we do with the students. And I presented it to the OSU vision, whatever, from, oh, guess I'm not tall enough. Here I am. I guess I could say that it worked in the sense that when we got through, my coworker next to me said, because I had to step out, and she said, I wish you would have stayed in there, because I was the holder of the checks that day, and somebody wanted to check outside, outside the meeting. So I went out, and she said, the OSU woman was in tears because she said, this is the kind of programs we want to fund. So we were awarded like almost 200,000 from the Oklahoma State University to expand a program at our camp. I mean, didn't help me personally, but helped our organization, you know, so.
Yeah, but that's amazing. That was working.
Mhm.
Thank you. So yeah, so be thinking about those areas where it's working well, it's working not well at all, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle where you're like, it's working, but maybe not as great as I would like. Because there tend to be things that fall into all 3 of those buckets. And let's look at a couple of examples. So I think all of you are familiar with this level of reporting and data sharing. Most of you just finished up your APR and sharing that data. So I'm curious, how many of you actually share your APR report with anyone other than OIE? All right, I see Allison says she shares it with somebody. Allison, who do you share it with?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We share it with our Board of Education and with our parent advisory committees. And basically anybody who wants to have information on our projects, because we comply with Open Records Act. So if it comes up at a Board of Education meeting and they want to see it, they can come to my office and look through it. So it's open to the public as well.
Okay. And do you share, so other than when people specifically like request it through Open Records, if you're sharing it, do you share it just purely as it is in the APR, or do you change the format at all?
What I do is I'll go through it and make sure there's no student information on there, and make sure that I just double check it, and then I'll redact that if I have to, and then I'll provide it to them. But basically, because we're spending federal dollars and we want to have an open relationship with our community so they know what we're doing and what we're looking for and all of that, we share everything. And that way we've gotten a lot of buy-in, and they can see that we're actually making effort and trying and making progress.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else share their APR?
I do it in kind of a Word document, not to bother them with this. I mean, but our board has access to this if they want it.
Yeah.
But I do it in a Word document in a bulleted format on like Objective 1, Objective 2, Objective 3
Okay.
For the monthly. But I also report it to our partner, who is the tribe, Cherokee Nation Foundation, and she in turn is able to report to the tribal council.
Great. So you kind of take it and translate it for them.
Yes.
Thanks. All right, now I'm wondering, has anyone ever used the word compelling to describe your APR report? No compellings. How about exciting? Fantabulous. I'm not seeing a lot of takers.
You're
So,
being hopeful, really hopeful.
we got to keep the glass half full. It's the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, most of the responses I get when I shared this with the Board of Education and we went through it, they're like, this is mind numbing. Like, especially the Section A charts, they're like, okay, all right. Can you just tell us, how is this helping kids? That's all they really want to know.
Yeah. So what I'm going to remind everybody of is something that I feel like I say quite a bit, and bonus points to anyone who can tell me, what do I always say about the explanation of progress? That what does OIE want to see there? You've blocked it out. You're like, I finished my APR. I don't think about that again till next year.
You want us to tell the story more than what the numbers tell.
Yes, thank you. So Shannon gets the bonus points for the day. Yes, we are always asking for a robust explanation of progress that tells the story of that quantitative data. Because guess what? Those OIE program officers don't just read your one APR that you've fully admitted most people find lightly dull. They're reading 10, 20, 40 of them. You don't want to be number 37 in a stack of boring reports. You want to be number 37, the shining highlight of the day that tells this amazing story of all the things that are going on in your program and your community. And so that's really a good piece of what I want to make sure you kind of get today, is that your APRs and a multitude of other things you do with your data don't have to be mind-numbingly boring. We can zhuzh it up and make it as exciting and engaging as it really can be, and still meet the requirements of reporting, and hopefully make it something that you can and want to share with others. So another kind of way that I see a lot of people share data is just a standard report. So this is just an example of a report about work from home. So everybody started working from home during the pandemic. They did research in the US and the UK on the challenges and benefits of work from home. And this is just one snippet of a 28-page report on the challenges and benefits of work from home, which, if you make it through all 28 pages, is merely trying to suggest that there's benefit in working from home and people and organizations should look into continuing it. Do most people make it through the 28 pages? I highly doubt it. They also have a slide version that basically looks like what you're seeing here, not much more engaging. But there is a lot of info in there. Now, they also tried breaking it down into charts. Now, I mean, I find that a little more engaging than when I was back at the report version. But I must say, this is a little overwhelming for me. When I look at this, I don't immediately know what I'm supposed to be doing with myself. Now, if I take the time to process the chart, then I can start breaking down, okay, here are the various benefits that I could have, broken down by country, broken down by generation. They have another chart that breaks it down by sector. So I could look at that and be like, okay, we all primarily work here in education. So we really liked that there were more flexible working hours, better eating and sleeping habits. As a former teacher, yeah, benefits of maybe eventually getting lunch. Always nice. So I can start breaking it down. So it's definitely more user-friendly in many ways than when I was getting it in the big report, but still quite a bit going on. So we're going to think about how could we take this and really build it into more of a story. Before I show you what that looks like though, I want you each to think about one thing, and we're going to use it throughout the rest of our time. Think about one message or data point that you would like to communicate more effectively. And it could be communicating with anyone about anything. And it could be just one message about your program or one specific data point that you're like, I really just wish I could find a more effective way to communicate that. And I'll invite you, because it may take you a minute to kind of mull that over, that as you come up with what that is, if you feel comfortable, pop it in the chat. And then we're going to kind of use that as we go throughout some of these next steps. So let's explore another way of doing this. If we want to kind of get away from our standard way of sharing our data and sharing our messages, what might that look like in more of a engaging storytelling format? So this organization called Happy Data, which if you sometimes need something to be happy about, you can pop over to Happy Data, took that same report and those charts, and they made it into this that you see on your screen here. Now, one thing that makes it a little bit easier is that immediately, instead of just saying like, oh, you know, here's all of this and you kind of figure out what to do with it, they're drawing out, okay, bottom line, what's the message? US workers benefit from working from home. And then they go on to give me some details. So, okay, 58% had more flexible working hours, 28% more mindful of how I communicate. So they break that down. It's got this background image that definitely leads you to believe someone's working from home. I mean, what a nice, relaxing little tea steeper they have. They're having a nice Zen day. They could work on their work from home view, but it looks like a work from home environment. Little poppier in colors. Could it be better? Maybe. Is it easier to get the message out of this than the report or the chart? Thoughts? Do we think yes? You can do the thumbs up, thumbs down. Yeah. So if I were gonna try to go and explain to my organization that I want to keep work from home for my department, or I want to do work from home 2 days a week, I have better odds of someone viewing this and getting that data than asking them to read a 28-page report and glean from all of that, that it's going to be more beneficial. So that kind of leads us down this storytelling route. So before we can embark on a discussion regarding storytelling with data, we have to at least touch a little upon data literacy. So what's data literacy? To be data literate, you have to have the knowledge necessary to gather, analyze, synthesize, and convey information graphically and in writing to support decision-making. So at its most basic, it's using data to prove why you made a decision. And within the context of a lot of our learning environments, it's the ability to interpret and use multiple data sources effectively to improve teaching and learning. Like we talked about before, often we are really inundated with data, often more than we feel like we have time to really analyze and digest. So being data literate means we can take that data, make sense of it, and hopefully use it to become better educators, youth developers, program leaders, and ultimately improve outcomes for our students and participants. So that's really the first step. We're not going to go really deep into data literacy today because I want to focus on the storytelling aspect, but know that that is the first step of this process. Then, second step is really data visualization, which helps us to better memorize and digest information. So just like we saw before, that visual allowed us to break down 28 pages of data into something more easily digestible. And then the storytelling aspect helps to persuade and make informed decisions. It gives that background and that context. So we're going to focus for the rest of the time primarily on storytelling with data and the various pieces that come with that. And combining these pieces, your data and your story will both become stronger and hopefully come alive for your audience. So I really liked this graphic, and you'll see throughout the presentation today, instead of creating a lot of graphics, I tried to pull examples from all across different fields and different folks to show you different types of data visualizations and data storytelling examples throughout. And you'll notice that as we go, if you want to see where those are from, all the links to get to those source images are on each of the slides, which you can download off the platform. So with storytelling with data, we typically say that there are going to be three components to that: the data, the accompanying visuals, and the accompanying narrative. So we use the data with the narrative in order to explain things. We use the data with the visuals to hopefully enlighten people. And hopefully that narrative and visual aspect makes that data more engaging. And that puts us in this beautiful little perfect sweet spot where people understand what we're sharing, they connect with it, and they're ready to make action and make decisions based on what we're sharing with them. Interestingly enough, when you think about the two sides of the brain, when we activate the visual aspect and the narrative aspect, it's actually using both sides of our brain and helps us to cement that info more deeply, which is what we probably want if we're taking the time to share data. So Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called Made to Stick, and they were doing experiments with their Stanford classes, testing what was more memorable, statistics or stories. So they would have students give 1-minute speeches, literally just 60 seconds. And in that, they would have them share either 2 to 3 statistics or a story. Okay, and then they would have the audience try to recall that information. Those who focused on the statistics, just 2 to 3 of them, only 5% of the audience even recalled one of their statistics. Those who used stories to explain the same information, 63% of them recalled the story. Stories connect with our brains. They literally turn on receptors. And no matter how great the statistics are, our brain just doesn't quite interact with it the same way. And there's another kind of researcher, psychologist, Jerome Bruner, and his research said that we actually remember stories 22 times better than facts alone. So both of them kind of highlighting that same bit of information, that if we can combine these things, we're really going to drive home our message. So real decision-making is spurred by the emotion of story combined with the logic of data and influenced by visuals. So by using data storytelling, we can help improve the decisions that people make with data. And you can think about this in your own world. When people are asking you to make a decision on something, Do you purely look at the logical, hard data? What if they come to you with a personal story? Or a story about a student and the impact? Maybe you've looked at a component of your program or an activity that you're offering. You're like, attendance is down. I don't know if we should keep offering this activity. But if that instructor comes to you and is like, I know we used to have 20 kids and we're down to 10, but let me tell you about what's going on with these 10 that have still been participating. Do you think you're more or less likely to maybe hang on a little longer to that program? Most of us, it's going to at least make us think a little more about it, because it's that emotion coming together with that data. And so what this kind of chart is showing you is that research kind of shows that, again, if we're trying to spur people into action, that giving them data, yeah, you can definitely do it. But then as we provide that greater context all the way up to this concept of data storytelling, we are more likely to create that connection with the data and spur them into action. So if you want to do this, where do you start? So it can seem a little overwhelming, particularly you see some of these things and they look so polished and fancy and you're thinking, I don't know how to do that. That does not seem like something that is in my wheelhouse. And I don't have a fancy department that can help me make something like that, or that can help me think through these things. You can do it. I promise. And we are here to help you. So let's think about, hopefully you've been mulling, what is that piece that you want to convey more effectively, that data point, that message? And one great way to think about this, I think, is what problem are you solving? What's your message? And in this vein, sometimes I'll get the feedback like, I don't want to focus that much on what the problem is. I've got this great solution. I want to focus on the solution. So Albert Einstein said that if he was given an hour to save the planet, just 1 hour, he'd spend 59 of those minutes defining the problem, but he'd only spend 1 actually saving the world. Anybody, does that resonate? Do you know why he would only spend 1 minute actually saving the world? Any thoughts? So his thought was, the more we understand the problem or the situation or the context, the more we really dig in to what that is, the better the solution, the more effective the solution. So instead of hurriedly coming up with something and moving and focusing on that, I'm going to really dive into figuring out what's the problem or what's the context that I'm trying to explore, and then be able to make a really good informed decision and act upon it. So let's think about, does anybody have a message or a data point you feel like sharing that you would maybe like to communicate more effectively? And even if you don't have the exact, if you're like, well, I want to share more about the impact that I make on students, and you don't necessarily have a specific data point, that's fine. Nothing we want to get the word out about?
I put one in the chat. It would affect folks in higher ed as far as praxis pass rates, but it's always something that's on the mind of K-12 folks too. if you're looking at something that might be a little more universal, just early alerts and the impact that having an early alert system to reach out to students who are struggling would be another one if we're
Yeah.
looking for one to just talk about.
Sure. So yeah. A number of folks have some programs like that where they're trying to really intervene with students. Anybody else have anything top of mind before we move on? Might take advantage of the time. All right, so as we think about that, what data do you have to support or illustrate this message? Do you have data to support or illustrate that this is an effective program or that there's a need for this type of program? Do you maybe have data about how many students actually are alerted through the early alert system? Potentially.
Yep. So I do. I have numbers. Numbers
you
of early
know-
alerts that are resolved, those that are not resolved, and the impact of ultimately passing a course.
Ah, okay. Great. Okay. So let's think about building our story around this. So typically, you're going to go about building your story one of two ways. Sometimes we're doing that from a data analysis process. So I think this kind of lays it out really nicely when I was looking for one that went along. Oh, and I see, Georgia, you were sharing about self-esteem growth too. Yeah, we can look at both. So defining the question. So, you know, for Shannon, it sounds like maybe the question is an early alert system effective in helping our students pass their classes or potentially even just stay enrolled? For Georgia, you know, regarding self-esteem growth, you know, do students who regularly attend our program experience an increase in self-esteem? Now, I know we're oversimplifying right now because we have a 75-minute session, so we have to really
Yes,
move along. Yeah.
Yes, they do. There's stories that we can tell, like students that come to camp and they watch the role models and they like express where they want to know when they can work at our camp. They want to know when they can be a role model.
That's awesome. So as you're thinking about defining that question, when you're really doing it in your program and with your data and with your team, you do want to have a more robust discussion around that than we're able to have right here. And we're going to kind of bounce and come back. But I think this, oh, if it'll let me go to it. There we go. I think this is a great way to think about, you know, really building that question. Through your data analysis, and then ultimately in your data storytelling, are you trying to just be descriptive and explain what has happened? Sometimes that is what you're trying to do with your data storytelling, is you're just trying to explain this is what has happened. And in their example, what has happened is that 50 employees left the organization in the last 10 days. That's not good. So they could just be purely descriptive. So like for our examples here, you might just be trying to describe what your early alert system is. There could be a great deal of your stakeholders who really don't even understand what that is. So that might be your true focus at the time. Or is it diagnostic? Why did that happen? So in our example here, well, they're leaving because they're demotivated and they're having difficulty in work management. So again, kind of going back to Shannon's example, if we're being diagnostic, it could be, why do we need an early alert system? Or why are students maybe alerting more this year, hitting those early alerts than previous years? Was there something that we changed in the program, or is there maybe something that changed in the students? Okay. So that's the next level. It could be predictive. Maybe that's what you're trying to do with your storytelling, with your analysis. So what could happen? So again, in our HR kind of example over here, maybe we are thinking, well, we could get turnover to increase by 30%. Not get it to, but it could happen that it would increase by 30%. I worked in a school that we had 52 employees, and one year we had 37 leave. It was a rough year. So, maybe we're looking at, okay, if we've already had 50 leave in the last 10 days, if this continues, our turnover could increase by 30% this year, and our reputation could go down. I know our reputation as a school went down when we had 37 staff members leave. So same thing, as we think about our example, maybe we want to think about what could happen if one of our funders doesn't continue the early alert. What if we have to cut down on the early alert program? What could happen? Or what could happen if we're able to increase the support in the early alert system? So we may be looking predictively either way. Next up, prescriptive. What action could be taken? So in our HR world, maybe we want to organize counseling sessions. We want to provide some training to our staff, make them feel more supported. In our other example, prescriptive, maybe we want to suggest some changes to what happens when someone hits in the early alert. Maybe if they get a certain number of kind of pings in the system, we want more robust support to then be enacted. Maybe we want some additional things. We may have some ideas about things that would be helpful. So we want to be a little prescriptive about some actions that could be taken. And then finally, the last kind of option here is cognitive. What's the best action? So now we're looking at actual decision making. So in our HR example, we want to develop a comprehensive training program for employees and managers. So through this data story, I want to be able to highlight to my HR supervisors or whomever that this is what we need to do, that this is what will impact this problem. And so maybe over in our early alert example, we want to really encourage the school board or the college leadership that the best thing to be done would be to provide 2 additional counselors who solely focus on the early alert program. And we want to really show that that would be the best action. So by really defining what we're trying to do from the get-go, it helps us narrow it down so that we can be really finite. Because like we saw with the work from home example, sometimes we have a really good message, but we have maybe so much data that it almost overclouds our message. So we're really honing it in. So if I go back, now that we've defined a question, we can collect that data. And this is where, Georgia brings up a really good point. We can collect both quantitative, important, and qualitative, important. There is such value in the qualitative data that all of you have. And we don't have time today, but at another juncture, I would love to discuss really key ways to collect and utilize that qualitative data that is really helpful in this as well. Then you want to clean that data. You want to make sure that you've taken out any extra info, get it down again to what really supports and drives your message, and analyze that. And then you move to what I think is really the fun part, where you visualize and share your findings. So you're determining what are those images or image that's really going to best share that information, and accompanying narrative, the story piece, to drive home my message. Now, alternatively, you may be going about it this way, which is finding the story within the data. And there's space for both to happen within your data and your organization. So with this, you're really starting out by researching and understanding your audience. So think about those folks that you said you're sharing data with. If you know that you're regularly sharing data with your tribal council, really think about that audience and what do they want and need to know about your program and outcomes, and define your main goal. Now, I still think it's helpful at that point when you're defining your main goal to kind of come over here and think through some of these data analysis options as far as what your goal is. But then you're going to source the right data. And you're really going to try to find the story within that data. This can also happen when you're doing required reporting, when you're getting things together for your APR, and you're finding there is a story within this data. So let's move ahead and go ahead and try out some of this and see what this can look like in action. So just a reminder that we're going to be looking at how to combine the data piece with the narrative piece with the visual piece. We want all three. So let's look at a couple of examples. How many of you have a Spotify or know what Spotify is? So if you don't, or if you do, Spotify is a music app where you can listen to music, if you're like me, for free, because I refuse to pay for the premium, or for premium. People who have the premium, it's going to keep track of all this info about your music listening. And then they started this, I guess, a few years ago now, where they give you the year in review. And people go wild for this. They love it. And it's very simple data stories about your music consumption for the year. So you could see here, like this was their 2019. They've got a visual of one of the top artists. I'm assuming it's Chelsea Cutler. But you get your top 5 artists, your top 5 songs. How many minutes did you listen to music over the last year? And what was your favorite genre of music? And then they also, when you get this, make it really easy. So look at their company narrative. If you listen to a year's worth of amazing music and don't post about it, did it really happen? I mean, that's pretty catchy. And they easily make it where you can then go share that out. So not only are they really effectively tying their users back into what they offer, similar to how you may want to tie your students back into what you offer and what they're getting out of it, but they're also really getting them, the users, to highly market on their behalf. Because when these come out every year, I see across my social media, tons of people sharing out their wrapped year in review. They all want to share, look what I did. You can see here, like, you've listened to artists from 39 countries. People are thinking, oh, that's so cool. Here's a map of, the music that I've been listening to. And I've got a fun graphic I can post out on my social media, but that also is reminding everyone, hey, Spotify's super cool. And when they started this, there was a rash of people who all of a sudden were migrating from using Apple Music, which had been a very popular way to listen to music, over to Spotify because they wanted this. They wanted to have a data story at the end of the year. Wouldn't it be cool if people clamored for your data in such a way? Now, something a little less poppy. So this is looking at gaps, education gaps. And you can see, again, they're taking you right to whatever the message is. There's still a large gap between Black and white education. And they've used very strong visuals to highlight that. And then with each one, they drive home their key message. What was once a gap of 22% is now 3%. This gap has been consistent. This has increased. Gap in bachelor degrees has significantly increased, not this one really. And so they really clearly just lay out these 6 key data points to show there is still a significant gap and what challenges in youth contribute to that gap. And so it's really easy to see, okay? You're sharing that there's less resources at home, such as computer and internet access. Parents traditionally share a similar education gap. And unsafe neighborhoods are more common. So it's really easy to see what they're trying to share out with other stakeholders. And think about what are some key things that you could share out in this way? Is there a key dilemma that you want to share out that you could break down very succinctly? This next one, I really love as I think about our participants, whether you're working with an early childhood program, a K-12, a college program, you could do something like this. So this is the anatomy of a primary school teacher. And it's actually their kind of cheeky way of recruiting teachers. And so we won't spend time to go through this whole thing right this minute, but I invite you really come back to this later because it is a really kind of fun way to share about what makes a teacher that you could do for some of your participants. You know, what does one of your participants look like? And not physically, but these aspects. All right. And we're running close on time, so I'm going to make sure we're able to make it through our last bits here. So as we're thinking about those 3 components, when we want to then build out our data into a story, we have to start with our data. So you have to go through that process before where we're defining what problem or message are we really focusing on. And then it's time to develop that story. Because we've got our data bubble. Now let's develop out that narrative bubble. One thing I like to really encourage is when you're really thinking about building a strong data story, is to build it into a story, not a novel. Make it a digestible chunk. And then you could always provide something with greater context. But think about what's that digestible chunk. Think about exactly what you want your audience to walk away knowing. And then start building that out. Craft that into a narrative. And really all those same skills that make a great story when I'm working with my 8th graders, when I was an English teacher, make you a great story when you're building one about your program. So you'll see, most great stories start out with setting and a hook. So give that background on the current situation. Give that why someone should kind of come along on this data story. Then you have your rising insights. So supporting details. What's that additional information that illustrates the problem, the opportunity, the situation? And then your aha moment. That's going to be hearkening back again to like we were seeing on the pyramid, that decision you want them to make, that piece of knowledge you want them to grasp onto. And then really reel it home with a solution and next steps. A lot of times when we're taking the time to craft a data story, it's because we want someone to do something. Whether that is, we want them to think something, we want them to fund something, we want them to participate in something, we want them to give their focus and attention to something. But typically, we're not just sharing it out for our own health. We do ultimately want something out of that. What is that? Make that clear to them. Make the ask, make the recommendation. And that is your story. And then the final step will be your visual. And I think it's nice here to really, you already had your author hat on, you had your data scientist, then you had your author, and now you're going to be a designer. You're going to get to be creative. We want to draw the eye to what's important. You can always, again, in the accompanying narrative or in the pieces that you're sharing aloud, give the full, but what is that really key piece that we want to draw the eye to in your message visually? Think about a color scheme. As we looked at some of the past examples, you can tell there was definite thought given into the color scheme, not just whatever the default was in the PowerPoint slide deck. Think about using the right visual, and I have a great tool on the next slide that I find really helpful with that. And then really think about keeping it simple and making it clear. Don't overdo it. Don't overcomplicate it. Let the visual add to the story, not be the story. So when you're thinking about the visuals, this is an area that I think often is a little bit sticky for folks because there are so many different ways that you can represent things, even within, charts and graphs and things like that. So there are 2 great resources. This one is from Extreme Presentation, and it really just kind of walks you through, okay, what are you trying to show? And what are the best ways to show that? And so you can kind of walk through and it kind of guides you toward what may be a really good visual for you. The other one is through Chart Guide. It's really overwhelming on the tiny slide on your computer right now, but when you pull it up by itself, much easier to see. It has all kinds of really cool looking charts that you might not have ever thought to use with your data. But it'll tell you like, oh, did you think about this? If you want to show time, look at all these things that could be a cool way to do that. And it also gives you some really good do's and don'ts here. Yeah, and I see, that sometimes we just don't feel like we're maybe the most creative. So I think things like this really help me because it gives me options to pick from. I don't have to just innately come up with it. And then I know we just hit time. We have like 2 minutes remaining in content for those who are able to stick around. So I just want to share a number of helpful tools and resources. So these are some great options that are available online that are either entirely free or have a robust free version, because free is my favorite price point. our grants are easily able to afford free. So as you look at these, just kind of a quick run through, things like Piktochart, Infogram, Data Wrapper, Visme, Looker, those are all ones that you can plug your data in and it will actually build you visuals for you and makes it very user friendly to be able to do that so that you're not, again, having to come up with it all on your own. Things like Canva have a lot of built-in templates that can help you do that same thing. But a lot of times Canva will also go ahead and package it in a whole like slide deck or a whole marketing campaign, whatever it is you're needing. Things like Presentation Go, if you're trying to build a presentation to tell your data story, they have some really great free visuals that you can use to be able to do that. If you need icons, you'll notice a lot of these different visuals, infograms, data stories have icons a lot. Flat Icon has a really robust library of free icons that you can even customize the colors on. And then that brings me in the color world to this Coolers. So if you are stuck on a color scheme, or maybe you're like, well, I know I want this one color because it's our school color, but I don't know what goes with it without looking weird. It will actually create a color palette for you. So if you need 3 colors, if you need 7 colors, it will help you come up with your own color palette. And then it tells you the code for all the different colors that you can then plug into any of these other tools. So that's a quick run through of a few resources. Check them out, create free accounts, play with them, see what works best for you. Now to wrap up today, I will stick around for a couple minutes and answer any questions that you might have, but I would also love to know, we had 75 minutes. This is a huge topic, so we really had to kind of take a running jaunt through it. But is this an area that you would want to continue, that you would want additional technical assistance in that would be helpful, or additional tools and resources? So curious if that's of interest, as well as if there's any particular questions you have remaining, because we can also try to make sure and address those, even not necessarily today, but in the future.
Sarah, this is Allison.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have a hard time with is qualitative data. So I do surveys and things like that, and we leave spaces for people to leave, they answer questions, yes or no, they say, I agree, and we have all that quantitative stuff. But when it comes to the qualitative portion, I don't know how to best show that. So maybe on a future one, we can talk about things that are qualitative in nature, because
Yeah.
I'm totally getting all of the number stuff that you're showing and things like that, and how we can use those data when we have data points like strongly agree, strongly disagree, all those. But when it comes to like people expressing their feelings in a survey, when we say, write what you feel kind of a thing, how to best express that. Because like I said, I am not visually creative.
Yeah.
And I'll provide that to my Board of Education and say, here's their actual responses. But when you're looking through, like you said, pages and pages and pages of responses, they're like, summarize this for us, Allison. And I'm going, how do I summarize qualitative data?
Exactly. And you're like, are they really going to read all of my qualitative data?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your presentation. We use Canva. I will get more comfortable and better at doing visual stuff. But boy, I struggle so hard with the qualitative.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something we could definitely explore more. Would love to. All right. Well, like I said, feel free to pop in the chat or reach out separately and just let me know, if this is an area we want to continue to explore. And in particular, really let me know if there's tools or resources that you would like to know more about, or questions that you want us to address, kind of like the qualitative piece. Let me know. That's how we figure out what to offer next and provide for you. So I do want to just wrap up so that you can make it to the closing keynote, which will be starting any second, and you can just hop back over to the agenda to get to that. But I appreciate all of you spending this time, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation in the future.
Yeah, I was just gonna say quickly that with the information that you've given us, is OIE thinking about changing their the way they retrieve data so we can present something as what you're presenting to us?
Yeah, so I'll say the Section A piece, as far as, you know, how that form is laid out, is just a government form, so there's not really a way around that. However, you can input all of the more data story component into Section C. And I always encourage folks that if you're doing that, you just put in that explanation of progress, see Section C. And then your program officer knows, like, ooh, let me head to Section C for the good stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks. See you on the keynote.
They are ready and waiting for everyone. Thank you, everyone.